So now let's look at what happens during a skeletal muscle contraction. This figure demonstrates on the x-axis time and on the y-axis the amount of tension that's being created by a skeletal muscle fiber. Here we initially have a stimulus. So this would be a action potential which is occurring along a somatic motor neuron. So realize that that will then result in the release of acetylcholine. The release of acetylcholine occurring at the synaptic cleft will diffuse across and bind to nicotinic receptors, which will then generate a graded potential. And recall that this graded potential will be of sufficient magnitude to reach threshold. At this point, an action potential is then traveling along the sarcolemma, and it will then travel down T-tubules where it will interact with DHP receptors, which will then cause conformational change in the ryanodine receptors releasing calcium. So all those things that we just described are occurring during the latent period, and during this time there's no tension created. However, once calcium is released, we now are going to see tension being developed. So the presence of calcium now is binding to troponin, which is removing tropomyosin and allowing the interaction of actin and myosin, allowing cross-bridge formation and therefore tension. Now the relaxation phase is what's happening when the muscle fiber is no longer going to be creating tension. So what accounts for this is going to be the removal of calcium from the cytosol back into the smooth ER. And this is accomplished by what's called SERCA. And SERCA stands for sarcoendoplasmic reticulum calcium ATPase. So this requires ATP to pump the calcium back into the sarcoplasmic reticulum, and as calcium levels are reduced, then our troponin is no longer pulling tropomyosin off the binding sites, so those binding sites on actin for myosin will no longer be available. So a single stimulus will always result in contraction of a particular muscle fiber that always will generate the same amount of tension for that given fiber. This is referred to as a twitch. So the tension that's created is directly related to the number of cross bridges that are formed. Now there are various factors that can influence the amount of tension that are created in a single muscle fiber. And these all are going to be affecting the number of cross bridges that are formed. First thing that can affect the amount of tension that can be created in a single muscle fiber is the frequency of stimulation. And this results in something we call summation. So here we have a picture showing the time an action potential takes compared to the time that a muscle twitch takes. So notice that the stimulus here, the action potential, comes and goes long before the twitch has completed. So with a single stimulus, we get the twitch. We get a prescribed amount of tension within a given muscle fiber. If we stimulate that same fiber again, we can expect to see the same amount of tension created as a result of that single stimulus. However, if we stimulate this fiber before we've allowed it to return back to its baseline, what we'll see is an increased amount of tension created. This is referred to as summation. Now, as we continue to increase the frequency, what's happening is we're having increasing levels of calcium being released. And as a result of the increased calcium being released, we will see increased amount of tension created. Tetanus indicates a sustained contraction. At this point, we have what we call unfused tetanus. So notice that we are kind of leveling off at the amount of tension we create, but there's still fluctuations present. So that is called unfused tetanus. If we continue to increase the frequency, we then have a sustained level of contraction, and this is referred to as fused tetanus. So fused tetanus is the maximum amount of tension a single muscle fiber can produce. This is going to be related to the amount of calcium that is released. So the factors that can influence tension in a single muscle fiber include frequency of stimulation or summation, as we've just covered, but also the thickness of the muscle fiber can influence the amount of tension that's created. Again, if we consider that the amount of tension created is directly related to the number of cross bridges it can form, then a thicker muscle fiber will have more thick and thin filaments and therefore be able to create more cross bridges and hence more tension. The final thing that can affect tension in a single fiber is the length of the fiber or length of the sarcomeres prior to stimulation. This figure demonstrates the sarcomere length across the x-axis and the maximum tension created on the y-axis. I've superimposed some drawings of sarcomeres with varying degrees of overlap of actin and myosin. Here in the center, we show a sarcomere that we are going to say is at 100% optimal length. So at this point, if we were to stimulate this sarcomere and see how much tension would be created, we would say that this would create 100% of maximum tension. Now in a lab, they can take these sarcomeres and they can adjust their length before stimulating. And what's seen is that if the sarcomere is pushed together, meaning we have overlap of actin and myosin to the point that these thin filaments are bumping up against each other, if we stimulate the fiber at this point, we see that we develop less and less tension. And this is felt to be due to what we call steric hindrances, which means that these filaments are actually bumping into each other and preventing further shortening. On the other end of the spectrum is if we have the sarcomere stretched prior to stimulating. And realize that in this case, that as we stretch the sarcomere, we're reducing the amount of potential overlap between the actin and myosin, and at one point we'll get to the stage where there is no overlap and therefore no cross bridges can form. Therefore no tension would form. Now in our body, our muscles are arranged and created in such a way that they basically live around this, what we call optimal length. So we're basically getting near maximal tension anytime we stimulate our skeletal muscles within our body. So those are factors that affect tension within a single muscle fiber. As we continue the discussion, we need to introduce a new term, and this is called a motor unit. So here I've drawn the most simplest of motor units, and a motor unit is comprised of a motor neuron and all of the muscle fibers that it innervates. In this case, I just have drawn a single fiber. When we stimulate a motor unit, what's going to happen is that every fiber in that motor unit is going to be stimulated, and we can therefore assume that at tetanus, that motor unit is going to create a prescribed amount of tension. And recall that the maximum tension would be tetanus. So here's a similar picture of a motor unit, just showing multiple fibers present. So if ever we stimulate this motor unit and activate it, we're going to activate 100% of the fibers. So in this case, we stimulate the red motor unit, we can expect to see a specific amount of tension being developed, and we'll call this tetanus. So when we look at the factors that determine the strength of an entire muscle contracting, all those factors we discussed earlier with regards to an individual muscle fiber, those still are going to come into play. But the one additional factor that has to do with the muscle as a whole will be this idea of recruitment of motor units. So here we have our red motor unit, and we activate it, and we can expect to get a certain amount of tension created as a result of the combined effects of all of these fibers being stimulated. If that tension is not enough to accomplish the task, then we can activate another motor unit, in this case drawn in blue. So now when we're stimulating both of these motor units, we'll see that we'll get an increased amount of tension. And again, if that's not enough, then we can activate yet another motor unit to get a greater degree of tension. So when we bring in multiple motor units, this is referred to as recruitment. So when we activate motor units, there's going to be an interplay between our central nervous system and the nerves that are activating the muscles. When we are lifting a sub-maximal load, which means that it's less than the entire muscle can potentially lift, then we're not going to have to activate all of the motor units. We will simply activate the requisite number that will give us the amount of tension we need to lift that load. So in this situation, activated motor units can basically take turns creating tension. They can be rotated so that no motor unit gets fatigued. So this is referred to as asynchronous recruitment. And this results in what appears to be smooth contraction of a muscle that can maintain tension for extended periods of time. So if we were using a muscle that, say in theory, could lift 20 pounds, and yet we're only asking it to lift 5 pounds, we can activate various motor units and keep that tension sustained for a prolonged period of time. If, however, we are trying to lift a maximal load, which means all of the motor units have to be activated and activated to a level of tetanus to move that load, what we're going to see is that fatigue is likely to occur. So fatigue, for our purposes, we'll define that as the inability of muscle fibers to maintain tension. So let's say that our muscle could lift 40 pounds maximum. So here we're activating all the motor units we have in that muscle, and we're able to maintain that tension, but eventually we run out of energy and we are going to fatigue and no longer able to lift that weight. So fatigue is related to various factors. Again, we're not going to go into that for this particular class, but you can imagine that some of the factors that may be at play is depletion of energy stores, as well as accumulation of things like lactic acid that may affect the ability of the muscle to maintain tension. Now, motor units also are important when we think about the ability to precisely control motor movement. And the precision with which we can move is related to the size of the motor units. Now, when we refer to size, this is going to refer to the number of muscle fibers in the motor unit. So here I've drawn 2 motor units. We would refer to this as a small motor unit and this as a large motor unit. So we're not referring to the size of the fibers here. We're referring to the fact that there's few fibers, and that we call a small motor unit. This one has a lot of fibers, and we call this a large motor unit. So the smaller the motor units, meaning the fewer the fibers, those are going to be able to allow us to precisely control movement. So what we'll see is that in our body, where we have muscles that are meant for fine control, so that would be things like the muscles that control our eye movements, or the muscles that control the movement of our fingers, those tend to be smaller motor units. Those are to be contrasted with motor units that are desired, or that are in muscles that are more for strength. So our large muscles of our legs, the muscles that are involved with maintaining our posture, those are larger motor units. We don't need precision, but we need strength.